The solicitor's office smelled of stale paper and desperation. He'd forgotten that smell. Years of airy studios, the sharp tang of turpentine, the metallic bite of charcoal, those were my olfactory anchors. This place, however, was a different kind of anchor, a lead weight dragging me back. The man across the polished mahogany desk, a Mr. Sealers, had a face like a crumpled linen napkin, all indeterminate lines and weary folds. He spoke in hushed tones, as if the very act of discussing inheritance was a transgression. "And so," Mr. Sealers concluded, pushing a sheaf of documents towards me, "Blackwood Manor and all its contents are now yours, Mr. Dean. Mine." The word hung in the air, heavy and unwanted. Blackwood Manor. The name itself felt like a curse, a whispered incantation from a forgotten childhood. I traced the embossed crest on the top sheet of paper. A raven, wings spread, perched on a gnarled oak. Grandmother, I hadn't seen her in 20 years, not since before. She'd been a recluse, a shadow in the periphery of my fractured memories. Now he was gone, leaving me this mausoleum. "Are there any immediate concerns?" I managed, my voice raspy. I cleared my throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. Mr. Sealers offered a thin, unconvincing smile. "The property has been vacant for some time. Naturally, it will require attention. The groundskeepers have been maintaining a minimal presence." He paused, his gaze drifting to the grimy window. "There have been no reported incidents, however. It's simply aged, like old bones, like forgotten fears." The lawyer handed me a heavy iron key, its teeth worn smooth with age. It was an artifact from a past I'd spent a lifetime trying to outrun. Driving away from that office, the city's cacophony felt distant, muffled. My own car, a sleek, modern machine, felt alien against the backdrop of my swirling thoughts. I'd tried to forget. I'd packed my childhood into boxes, sealed them shut, and buried them deep beneath layers of paint and canvas. But it seemed the past, like a tenacious weed, had found a way to sprout. The journey to the manor was long, the landscape gradually shifting from manicured suburbs to a wilder, untamed country. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. As I turned onto the long, winding drive, the trees closed in, their skeletal branches clawing at the overcast sky. And then, through a gap in the gnarled oaks, I saw it. It was larger than I remembered, more imposing, more watchful. The iron gates, rusted and twisted, sagged open as if in weary resignation. My breath hitched. I parked the car at the foot of the crumbling stone steps and got out. I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the distinct, unnerving feeling of being observed. My hand trembled as I inserted the iron key into the massive oak door. It turned with a protesting groan, the sound echoing through the cavernous hall beyond. The air inside was thick with the cloying scent of dust, mildew, and something else, something faintly sweet and sickly, like overripe flowers. I stepped across the threshold, the heavy door groaning shut behind me with a final, definitive click. The sound vibrated through the floorboards, through my very bones. I stood in the foyer, my eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. Cobwebs draped the chandeliers like macabre decorations, and the once grand furniture was shrouded in white sheets, resembling spectral figures in the dim light. A floorboard creaked upstairs. My head snapped up. It was just the house settling, I told myself. Old houses do that. But the sound had been too deliberate, too paced. Nothing. I walked further into the house, my footsteps unnervingly loud on the marble floor. It was the same feeling I'd had as a child, the same gnawing fear that something was lurking just beyond my sight. Then I saw it. On the dusty landing at the top of the stairs, bathed in a sliver of moonlight filtering through a grimy window, sat a doll. It was small, porcelain, with vacant blue eyes and a painted smile that seemed too wide, too knowing. Leela. He was still here. After all these years, he was still here. Air in the hall seemed to thicken, to press in on me, making it hard to breathe. The sickly sweet scent intensified, almost suffocating. I wanted to run, to flee this place and its suffocating memories, but my feet were rooted to the spot. Leela's painted eyes seemed to fix on me, and in their glassy depths, I saw a flicker of something ancient and malevolent. Was she waiting for me? The iron key felt like a shard of ice against my palm. It was a lump of cold, dead metal, a promise of decay. The lawyer, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with a sympathetic grimace, offered a final, mumbled condolence before retreating back into the sterile light of his office. Now only the gravel crunched under my shoes as I approached the wrought iron gates of Blackwood Manor. They sagged like arthritic fingers, a dark silhouette against a sky the color of bruised plums. The air here was different, heavier. It pressed against my lungs, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something cloying, like wilting flowers left too long in stagnant water. My grandmother, I hadn't seen her in 20 years, not since the incident. A sprawling Gothic monstrosity that seemed to exhale a silent, mournful sigh. The gates groaned open with a sound like a dying animal, a protest that echoed in the unnerving stillness. The drive wound through overgrown grounds, the trees' skeletal arms reaching, clawing at the fading light. It was less a house and more a monument to abandonment, a place where memories festered. I parked my car, the engines hum an alien intrusion in the profound quiet. The air was cool, carrying a dampness that clung to my skin, raising gooseflesh despite the late summer afternoon. This was it. The massive oak door creaked open, revealing an entryway swallowed by gloom. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the grimy windows, illuminating a scene of arrested decay. The air inside was stagnant, thick with the smell of old paper and something faintly metallic like dried blood. A grandfather clock stood sentinel in the hall, its pendulum frozen, its face a cracked, accusing eye. Cobwebs draped the ornate furniture like shrouds. My footsteps, too loud, too intrusive, echoed on the marble floor. I moved deeper into the house, my senses on high alert. The silence wasn't empty, it was full. Full of waiting, full of things unseen. In what must have been the drawing room, a grand piano sat draped in a dust sheet, its keys a pale, spectral grin. A half-finished embroidery lay on a needlepoint hoop, the threads faded, the pattern lost. It felt like a snapshot of a life abruptly interrupted. My grandmother's life, a life I knew so little about. I ran a finger along a dusty side table, the wood gritty beneath my touch. A small, silver-framed photograph lay face down. I hesitated, then turned it over. It was my grandmother, younger, her face unlined. Beside her a child, me, and between us, perched on her shoulder, was Leela, the doll. Her porcelain face was unnervingly smooth, her painted eyes wide and vacant. Even in the faded photograph I could feel its gaze. I set the photo down quickly, my hand trembling. It was just a doll, a toy. I forced myself to breathe, to push the rising panic down. This was why I was here. To confront it, to dismantle the hold it had over me. I moved to the next room, a study. Books lined the walls, their spines cracked, their pages brittle. The desk was cluttered with papers, ink bottles, and a single dried rose. A faint scent, floral and sickly sweet, lingered here. I picked up a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle and yellowed. The handwriting was my grandmother's, spidery and elegant, but the ink was faded, some entries almost illegible. They grow louder. She watches me. I can't escape her. Who was she? Leela. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I closed the journal, the faint metallic tang in the air seeming to intensify. I walked to the window, looking out at the overgrown gardens. The fog was starting to roll in, thick and opalescent, obscuring the edges of the landscape. It was a familiar fog, the kind that had cloaked my childhood, that had made everything feel unreal, distorted. I turned back to the room, my gaze sweeping over the details. A small, intricately carved wooden box sat on a shelf. I reached for it, my fingers brushing against something cool and smooth. Porcelain. My breath hitched. It was a small, chipped piece of porcelain, the exact shade of Leela's cheek. It lay nestled amongst the dust, almost invisible. How had it gotten there? I hadn't seen Leela since the incident. Yet here was a piece of her. Was it a warning? A taunt? The fog outside pressed against the glass, a silent, suffocating presence. Had I truly come here to confront the past, or had I simply walked back into its embrace? The journal felt heavy in my hands, heavier than paper and ink should be. I'd found it tucked beneath a loose floorboard in the master bedroom, a room I'd avoided until now, the air inside thick with the cloying scent of dried flowers and something else. Something sharp and metallic, like old pennies. Grandma Ilara's script, spidery and almost illegible, filled the pages. It spoke of shadows, of whispers, of a constant, gnawing presence. And then there was the name. Leela. A name I hadn't heard in decades, a name that felt like a shard of ice in my gut. I'd gone to the window, needing air, needing to see something beyond the suffocating confines of that room. The fog, already a familiar shroud around this place, had intensified, swallowing the gnarled trees and the skeletal remains of the rose garden. It pressed against the glass, a silent, formless entity. I could barely make out the wrought iron fence that marked the property line. Beyond that, nothing, just the gray, featureless expanse. The journal had been too much. It had stirred up things I'd fought so hard to bury. My gaze swept across the room, taking in the faded grandeur. A four-poster bed draped in moth-eaten velvet. A vanity cluttered with silver-backed brushes and stoppered crystal bottles, their contents long since evaporated. And then I saw the trunk. An old steamer trunk, its leather cracked and peeling, sitting at the foot of the bed. It wasn't there yesterday, I was sure of it. My heart gave a little lurch, a familiar, unwelcome tremor. I approached it cautiously, my footsteps muffled by the threadbare Persian rug. The air grew colder as I neared. The metallic tang was stronger here, almost overpowering. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the rough, cool leather. It felt wrong, alive somehow. I hesitated, my breath catching in my throat. This was just a trunk, an old piece of luggage. Why did it feel like a trap? With a surge of determined, if shaky resolve, I lifted the heavy lid. The hinges groaned, a sound like a dying animal. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed lace and brittle silk, was a box. A small, intricately carved wooden box. Hands trembled as I reached for it. The wood was smooth, unnervingly so, and cool to the touch. It smelled faintly of lavender and decay. I lifted the lid, and there he was. Her painted smile was chipped, a grotesque rictus. Her dress, once a vibrant blue, was now faded to a dusty gray, the lace trim frayed and blackened. She sat there, propped against a stack of faded photographs, her remaining glass eye seeming to stare directly at me. A wave of nausea washed over me. My vision blurred. The room swam. I could hear a sound, faint at first, then growing louder. A child's giggle, high and unnerving. No, it wasn't a giggle. It was a dry, rustling sound, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. My hands flew to my ears, but the sound persisted, burrowing into my skull. The metallic scent intensified, filling my lungs, making me gag. I stumbled back, knocking over a small, ornate music box. It clattered to the floor, its lid springing open. A tinny, discordant melody sputtered out, then died. Leela sat in her box, unmoving, yet I could feel her gaze, a palpable weight pressing down on me. The air in the room was thick, heavy, suffocating. I had to get out. I had to leave this house. But my feet felt rooted to the floor, my body refusing to obey. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block it all out. The smell, the sound, the unbearable weight of her presence. But it was no use. He was here, he had always been here. And he was looking at me. The fog outside had crept further in, seeping under the door, swirling around my ankles like spectral tendrils. I could no longer see the bed, the trunk, the box. Only the doll, her single eye glinting in the gloom. How long had she been waiting for me? The journal's pages were brittle, a pale yellow like old bone. I traced the spidery script with a fingertip, the ink faded but still legible. Grandmother's words, her fear, stark and raw, spilled onto the page. She wrote of whispers, of the doll's eyes following her, of shadows that stretched and contorted into impossible shapes. I'd thought it was just the ramblings of an old woman, but as I read, the metallic tang in the air intensified, prickling the back of my throat. It was in the master bedroom that I found the doll, tucked into a dark corner, draped in a moth-eaten shawl. Leela, her porcelain face, once painted with rosy cheeks and a sweet smile, was now cracked, the paint chipped away to reveal a pallid, almost gray undertone. The other, a startling blue, seemed to bore into me, a silent accusation. I forced myself to breathe, to push back the rising tide of panic. This was just a doll, an old toy, but the air in the room grew heavy, suffocating. The scent of dried flowers and old pennies was now overpowering, thick enough to taste. I backed away, my hand reaching for the doorknob, my eyes locked on Leela. For a fraction of a second, I could have sworn her cracked lips curved into a smile. I slammed the door shut, my heart racing like a trapped bird. Days bled into nights. Sleep offered no refuge. I'd wake up in a sweat, the metallic scent clinging to my sheets, the phantom touch of porcelain on my skin. I tried to focus on the renovations. The dust, the smell of fresh paint, the rhythmic rasp of sandpaper against wood, these were anchors in the rising tide of unreality. But the house fought back. Tools would disappear, only to reappear in illogical places. Doors I'd locked would be found ajar. They were no longer confined to my dreams. They slithered at the edges of my hearing, faint at first, like the rustle of leaves, then growing, coalescing into a low, insistent murmur. One afternoon, I was in the main hall, stripping away layers of peeling wallpaper. The air was thick with the musty odor of decay, a scent that had become sickeningly familiar. I heard it then, distinct and clear from the floor above. A child's giggle. It wasn't the innocent sound of a happy child. I froze, my hands suspended midair. My own childhood memories, buried so deep, clawed their way to the surface. I grabbed the journal, my fingers trembling. Grandmother's words seemed to pulse with a new urgency. She feeds on fear, one entry read. The more I resist, the stronger she becomes. The house. It's a sanctuary. Sanctuary. The word felt like a physical blow. That evening, as dusk bled into the sky, painting the stained glass windows in hues of bruised purple and blood orange, I found myself drawn to the overgrown garden. The fog had begun to roll in from the nearby marsh, a thick, gray blanket that swallowed the skeletal trees and muted the already fading light. I stepped out into the recreation yard in thick fog. Watchtower invisible. The familiar scent of wet earth and decaying leaves filled my nostrils, but beneath it, faint, was that sharp, metallic tang. I stood there listening. The fog muffled all sound, creating an eerie, disorienting quiet. Then I heard it again. The giggle, closer this time. It seemed to come from all directions at once, a disembodied sound that played tricks on my ears. I spun around, trying to pinpoint its source, my breath catching in my throat. Nothing. Only the swirling mist, obscuring everything, making me feel utterly alone, yet watched. I could feel it now, a pressure building in the air, a palpable sense of malevolence. They were just outside the veil of the fog, just beyond my sight. But I knew they were there, they always were. My own reflection, caught in the polished surface of a forgotten birdbath, seemed distorted, elongated. My eyes looked too wide, too haunted. Was that truly me, or was it Layla? Peering out from behind my own gaze, the thought sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. How much of me was still my own? The journal lay open on the dusty floorboards, its secrets a tangible weight in the air. Grandmother's frantic scrawl was a map of her unraveling. She watches, always watches. I could feel it, a prickling awareness on my skin, the phantom sensation of eyes on my back, even when I was alone in this mausoleum of a house. The air, thick with the scent of decay and something else, something cloyingly sweet like overripe fruit, pressed in. My own breathing sounded too loud, a ragged counterpoint to the house's groans. I'd spent the last few days in a feverish daze, a strange compulsion guiding my hands. The attic studio, once a sanctuary, had become a battleground. Canvases, stacked against the walls, were no longer blank. They were bleeding with color, or rather, the absence of it. My usual bold strokes had devolved into frantic, jagged lines. The vibrant oils felt thick and suffocating, clinging to my brush like tar. The first piece was the worst. I'd intended to paint a still life, a simple bowl of wilting roses, but my hand had moved with a will of its own. The roses became contorted, their petals twisted into screaming mouths. The bowl warped, its ceramic surface rippling like disturbed water. And in the background, just a suggestion. A smudge of dark, oily paint that coalesced into something familiar, the glint of porcelain eyes. Leela. I'd tried to scrub it away, but the paint had sunk into the canvas, a stain that refused to be erased. A knot of unease tightened in my gut. This wasn't just art anymore, it was a confession. Then came the figures, twisted, elongated shapes that writhed across the canvas. Limbs akimbo, faces blurred into a uniform expression of silent agony. They were me, or fragments of me, pieced together from the fractured memories I'd long buried. The fear, the helplessness, the overwhelming sense of being trapped. I recognized the rough texture of the brick wall against my cheek, the suffocating dampness of the air, the metallic tang of something I couldn't quite place. It was the warehouse, the place I'd tried so hard to forget. Each brushstroke felt like a physical blow. My knuckles were raw, my shoulders ached with a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Yet, I couldn't stop. The urge was primal, an insistent thrumming beneath my skin. It was as if Leela herself was guiding my hand, her spectral presence a cold breath on my neck, whispering directions. Deeper despair, make them see. The scent of turpentine and something else, something metallic and sharp, filled the studio. It mingled with the perpetual mustiness of the house, creating a nauseating cocktail. My vision swam. I shook my head, trying to clear it. Just the fog. The fog that always seemed to cling to this house, even indoors. I looked at the newest canvas. It was larger, more ambitious. A vast, empty expanse of gray like a sky choked with perpetual twilight. In the center, a single, stark white door. It was the door to my childhood bedroom, but the handle was wrong. It was twisted like a skeletal hand. It was the same blackness I saw in Leela's eyes. My hands trembled. I hadn't painted that, not consciously. It had emerged from the canvas as if by magic, a manifestation of a fear so deep it had been a part of my very marrow. It was the fear of what lay beyond that door, what Leela had always promised would be there. I backed away, my heart racing a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The studio felt smaller, the walls closing in. The paintings, they were not just paintings. They were windows into my shattered psyche, and through them, Leela was peering out, and he was beckoning. I could hear it then, a faint, almost imperceptible sound beneath the house's groans. Dean, I stumbled back, knocking over a can of linseed oil. It spilled across the floorboards, its viscous sheen reflecting the distorted images on the canvases. It wasn't just in my head anymore, it was in the room. I looked at the door, the white door with the skeletal hand for a handle. The blackness beneath it seemed to deepen, to writhe. It was inviting me in. To face what? To finally confront the horror I'd spent a lifetime running from. And then, a new canvas caught my eye, one I didn't remember starting. It was a frantic, charcoal sketch of a place I hadn't thought of in years. A desolate expanse, shrouded in a thick, suffocating mist. A recreation yard in thick fog, watchtower invisible. But scrawled in the corner, in a hand that was terrifyingly my own, were the words, "She made me go there." What had happened to me in that fog? The damp air clung to me, a shroud woven from the very fog that swallowed the recreation yard in thick fog, watchtower invisible. Each breath felt heavy, tasting of stale earth and something else, something metallic and sharp, like old pennies. My boots squelched in the mud, a sound unnervingly loud in the oppressive quiet. I'd come here seeking answers, a foolish hope born from a night of unsettling dreams. The dreams always started the same, a blur of motion, a choked cry. The chilling certainty of being utterly alone. The ink, faded and spidery, told a story I'd tried to bury for decades. She wrote of Leela not as a doll, but as a vessel, a conduit. She'd acquired Leela from a traveling peddler, a man with eyes like chips of obsidian and a smile that promised more than it could deliver. He'd spoken of the doll's unique qualities, its ability to listen, its capacity to learn. My grandmother, a woman I remembered only as a stern silhouette against dusty window panes, had been lonely, terribly so. She'd sought solace in the arcane, dabbling in practices that, according to her own frantic script, had spiraled beyond her control. Leela, the doll, it had been her confidante, her silent observer, but it had begun to demand more. It had begun to influence. The fog pressed in, thick and viscous. It muffled the world, isolating me in this damp, forgotten space. A phantom sentinel, always observing, always judging. My grandmother had written of its gaze, a prickling sensation on her skin that never truly faded. She believed it was the doll, its unseen eyes following her every move. Then came the entry that made my stomach clench, a knot of ice forming in my gut. It detailed a child's visit. My visit. I remembered the stifling quiet of the house, the scent of dried lavender and dust. And I remembered Leela. She sat on a high shelf in my grandmother's sitting room, her porcelain face perpetually fixed in a serene smile, her glass eyes glinting with an unnatural light. I'd been warned not to touch her. A foolish, primal fear had kept me at a distance. My grandmother's handwriting grew erratic here, the lines jagged, as if her hand had trembled violently. She described my fascination, my childish curiosity. She'd caught me watching the doll, my small hand outstretched. She'd written, he felt its pull, the same pull that has ensnared me. The fog seemed to thicken, swirling around my ankles like spectral tendrils. A faint scratching sound, like tiny fingernails on wood, reached my ears. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was coming from the direction of the old shed, the one at the far end of the recreation yard in thick fog, watchtower invisible, where she used to keep the garden tools. My grandmother had always kept it locked. The journal spoke of a specific night, a night of a terrible storm. My grandmother had been ill, confined to her bed. I was alone in the house, save for the doll. She wrote, "The storm raged. The child cried out. I heard a change. My hands were slick with sweat. The metallic tang in the air was stronger now, almost overwhelming. I remembered that night. I remembered the thunder that shook the very foundations of the house. I remembered the flickering lights. And I remembered the doll. It had been in my room. I'd woken to find it sitting at the foot of my bed, its painted smile wider somehow than before. I'd screamed. I'd thrown things. My grandmother's final entries were a desperate plea. She'd tried to contain Leela to bind it. She'd used old wards, forgotten incantations, but Leela was too strong. It fed on fear. She hadn't been protecting me from Leela. She'd been trying to protect herself from Leela and from what it made her do. The scratching sound came again, closer this time. My gaze snapped towards the shed. A sliver of deeper blackness yawned within. My grandmother's journal mentioned that she'd hidden something there, something that might appease Leela, or perhaps something that might finally destroy it. She'd never specified what. She'd only written of the desperate hope that it would be enough. The last sentence was barely legible. He mustn't remember. Not what I did. What had she done? What had she made me do? The air in the recreation yard, in thick fog, watchtower invisible, was a damp, clinging shroud. It muffled everything, turning the already sparse grounds into a nebulous expanse of gray. I'd been pacing for hours, the rough concrete biting at the thin soles of my boots. Every shadow seemed to writhe. Every whisper of wind through the unseen fence felt like a breath on my neck. Leela. The name itself was a foul taste on my tongue. What had she done? The question clawed at my mind, a relentless gnawing ache. I needed to get out. The thought solidified, a desperate, urgent need. The house, this suffocating mausoleum of memories, was no longer just a place of inherited dread. It was a cage. Leela's influence, once a subtle poison, now felt like a physical weight pressing down on me, distorting the very fabric of my senses. The fog outside offered no solace. It was just another layer of her suffocating embrace. I turned back towards the house, its skeletal silhouette barely discernible through the swirling mist. The grand oak door, once a symbol of unwelcome inheritance, now seemed like the maw of some ancient beast. I had to leave. My hands trembled as I reached for the heavy brass knocker. As my knuckles brushed the metal, a faint melody drifted from within the house. A music box. The tinny, discordant notes were achingly familiar, a sound I hadn't heard in decades, yet one that was seared into my very being. It was the lullaby my grandmother used to play, the one that always accompanied Leela's presence. My blood, which had been sluggish with fear, now felt like ice water. I pulled my hand back as if burned. The music stopped abruptly, replaced by a soft thud from somewhere deep within the house, like something heavy being dragged across a floor. My breath hitched. It was a deliberate sound, I was sure of it. A taunt. Leela's voice. I spun around, my heart racing with a frantic, irregular beat. Nothing. My own breathing sounded unnaturally loud, ragged gasps in the stillness. There's nowhere to go, the voice continued, this time seeming to echo from the very ground beneath my feet. This is my home now. A low creak emanated from the house. Not the wind, not the settling of old timbers. It was a deliberate, measured sound, like a heavy door slowly swinging open. I forced myself to take a step back. Then another. The fog seemed to thicken, pressing in closer, obscuring the house entirely for a moment. When it receded, the doorway was still there, but something was different. It looked like lamplight, but wrong, too weak and uneven. Hesitantly, I took a step towards the house again. My rational mind screamed at me to run, to break through the fog, to find the road, any road. But a morbid curiosity, a desperate need to understand, held me captive. Was she playing with me? Was this an illusion? As I neared the threshold, the smell of dust and decay intensified, mingling with something else, something cloying and sweet like rotting flowers. The yellow light spilled out, painting the fog in grotesque hues. I could hear a faint rustling now, like silk being dragged across a rough surface. The light, I realized with a sickening lurch, wasn't from a lamp at all. It was coming from the end of the hall, from a small, ornate table. And on the table was Leela. He was sitting there, her porcelain face tilted towards me, her painted eyes gleaming in the faint, unnatural light. The light itself seemed to emanate from her, a soft, phosphorescent glow that clung to her like a second skin. Beside her, on the dusty mahogany, sat a small, tarnished music box. It was open, its tiny ballerina frozen mid-pirouette. The rustling sound I heard was the slow, deliberate movement of Leela's own stiff fabric limbs. He was moving, he was alive. Leela's head tilted further, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a tremor through me. Her painted smile seemed to widen, stretching her porcelain cheeks into a grotesque rictus. The music box clicked shut with a sharp, definitive sound. I stumbled back, my boot catching on an unseen imperfection in the concrete. The fog swirled around me, disorienting, suffocating. Was this a real trap, or just another of her twisted games? And if it was real, how was I supposed to escape? The air hung thick and damp, a shroud of gray that swallowed the edges of the recreation yard in thick fog, watchtower invisible. My breath plumed before me, a fleeting ghost in the oppressive stillness. This was it, the place, the smell of wet concrete and something else, something metallic and cloying, like old pennies and rust. It clung to the back of my throat. I'd found the hidden entrance behind the loose stone in the cellar, just as the fragmented memories, the ones I'd fought so hard to bury, had finally surfaced. A narrow, winding passage, each step coated in a gritty dust that clung to my shoes like damp soil. It had led me here, to this desolate expanse, this forgotten corner of the estate. I wiped them on the rough fabric of my trousers, the friction doing little to calm the frantic thrumming beneath my skin. The house had been a cage. But this place, this felt like the heart of it, the source. Leela was here. I knew it with a certainty that chilled me to the bone. A faint, high-pitched giggle seemed to weave through the fog. It was a sound I hadn't heard in years, yet it was etched into the very marrow of my being. Leela, her laughter, a brittle shard of glass. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint its origin, but the fog distorted everything, muffling and amplifying in equal measure. My gaze swept across the indistinct shapes in the mist. Bare skeletal trees clawed at the sky. A rusted metal bench, its surface pitted and peeling, sat like a forgotten sentinel. I took a step forward, my boot crunching on unseen debris. Each sound felt amplified, a betrayal of my attempt at stealth. I was exposed, vulnerable. The old fear, the one that had held me captive for so long, threatened to engulf me. But beneath it, something else was stirring. A stubborn ember of defiance. I wouldn't let her win, not again. My eyes scanned the ground, searching for any sign, any disturbance in the uniform dampness. The fog swirled, revealing and then concealing, playing tricks on my vision, or just the mist coalescing. Then I saw it. A small white object half buried in the mud. My heart leaped into my throat. It was a button. A small pearl button, the kind that would have adorned a child's dress. It was identical to the ones on Leela's faded blue smock. My fingers trembled as I reached for it. The mud was thick, clinging to the button to my fingertips. I pulled it free, the small object feeling impossibly heavy in my palm. It was a tangible link, a confirmation. He was close. The giggling came again, closer this time, and tinged with a cruel amusement. It seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. I stood, my muscles tensed, my senses on high alert. A faint, wavering light flickered in the distance, struggling to pierce the dense fog. It pulsed, weak and erratic like a dying heartbeat. I squinted, trying to make out its source. As I watched, the light grew stronger, steadier, resolving into a small porcelain face bathed in an unnatural glow. She sat on the rusted bench, her painted eyes fixed on me. Her smile, a fixed, unsettling curve, seemed to widen in the dim light. Her hair, the color of spun moonlight, was matted and tangled. I stood frozen, my breath catching in my chest. She hadn't moved, yet she felt like he was closing the distance between us with every beat of my own frantic heart. The air crackled with an unseen energy. The metallic smell intensified, now mingled with the faint, sickly sweet scent of decaying flowers. I forced my legs to move, each step a monumental effort. I had to get closer. I had to confront her, to sever the connection that had plagued me for so long. The button felt like a burning coal in my pocket. "I don't belong here, Leela," I managed, my voice raspy. She tilted her head, her porcelain features unreadable. "But I do, Dean. This is my home, and I am mine." The fog seemed to thicken around her, swirling like a living entity. The giggling started again, a chorus of spectral mirth. My hands clenched into fists. I remembered the rituals, the hushed words, the desperate pleas of my grandmother. They hadn't been enough then, but I had something now that she hadn't possessed. Knowledge, and a desperate, clawing will to survive. "No," I said, the word a raw rasp. "I'm not yours anymore." Leela's smile didn't falter, but her eyes, the air grew heavy, suffocating. The metallic tang was almost unbearable now, burning my nostrils. I took another step, then another, closing the distance. The fog swirled around her, obscuring her form, then parting to reveal her again. He was a fixed point in the swirling chaos, a beacon of pure malevolence. I can never escape. The ground beneath my feet began to tremble, a low vibration that resonated through my bones. The rusted bench creaked and groaned, as if under an immense strain. The fog pulsed, mirroring the erratic light emanating from the doll. I reached into my pocket, my fingers closing around the small pearl button. It was a reminder of what he was, what he had done, and a symbol of what I had to overcome. "I'm not running anymore," I said, my voice gaining a measure of strength. Leela's painted lips stretched wider, a grotesque caricature of a smile. The light around her flared, blindingly bright for a moment, then abruptly died, plunging the recreation yard in thick fog, watchtower invisible into an even deeper gloom. The trembling stopped. The creaking ceased. Where had she gone? The ground beneath my feet began to tremble, a low vibration that resonated through my bones. I reached into my pocket, my fingers closing around the small pearl. It was the button, the pearl button from Leela's dress, the one I'd pried off with trembling hands when I was 7. It felt impossibly smooth against my calloused fingertips, a tiny, cool anchor in the swirling chaos. The light from the doll intensified, not a glow anymore, but a sharp, piercing beam that seemed to bore into my very soul. The fog, thick and cloying, began to writhe. It wasn't just moisture in the air, it felt alive, a suffocating shroud clinging to my skin, tasting of salt and decay. I knew with a certainty that iced my veins that this was it, the culmination of everything. The attic, the whispers, the shadows that danced at the edge of my vision, it all led here, to this desolate recreation yard in thick fog, watchtower invisible. The rhythmic, guttural thrumming that had been a constant companion for weeks was now a deafening roar, vibrating the very air I breathed. My breath hitched, a ragged sound lost in the din. My hand tightened around the button. It was a silly thing, a child's relic, but it was mine. It was proof of a time before Leela's porcelain eyes had held that knowing, malevolent gleam, before the whispers had started, before my mother. The doll, perched on the rusted bench, seemed to swell, its painted smile stretching impossibly wide. The light, originating from its chest, pulsed with a sickening rhythm, each beat a physical blow against my chest. I could feel the texture of the rotting wood beneath my boots, splintered and damp. Then a sound, not the roar but something beneath it, a faint, childish weeping. It was the sound I remembered from my childhood, the sound that had driven me to the attic, to the doll. But it was distorted, warped, laced with a malice that made my teeth ache. It was coming from Leela, or rather, from the thing that wore Leela's form. I had to do something. I couldn't let it consume me, not entirely, not like it had consumed. My gaze fell on the old, rusted swing set, its chains dangling like skeletal fingers. The fog swirled around it, obscuring the metal, making it seem to fade in and out of existence. I remembered playing there, my mother pushing me higher and higher, her laughter a bright, clear bell in the summer air. That memory felt like a phantom limb, a beautiful ache of something irretrievably lost. The weeping grew louder, more insistent. It was a siren song drawing me closer. My feet moved, an instinct I couldn't control. The pearl button was a tiny point of warmth in my palm. I clutched it, willing myself to remember my mother's face, her scent of lavender and old paper. As I approached the bench, the light from the doll flared, momentarily blinding me. When my vision cleared, the doll was no longer on the bench. It was in the air, floating, its threadbare dress billowing as if caught in a phantom wind. The weeping stopped, replaced by a low, sibilant hiss. And then I saw it. Not the doll, not entirely. It was vaguely human, but elongated, its limbs too thin, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It was the thing that had fed on my fear for so long. My hand went to my pocket again, searching for, what, a weapon? There was no weapon against this, only the button, a small, insignificant thing. With a surge of desperation, I hurled the button. It struck the doll's chest, right where the light emanated. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then a shriek, not a human shriek, but something ancient and tearing, like dry leaves being ripped apart. The light sputtered, flickered, and died. The fog began to recede, not dissipating, but pulling back, as if disgusted by what it had witnessed. The rusted bench stood empty. The doll lay on the ground, a discarded husk. I stood there, my chest heaving, my legs trembling. The cold air bit at my exposed skin. I looked at my hands, expecting to see them stained, broken. They were clean. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, solitary rhythm. Was it over? Had I truly ended it? The recreation yard in thick fog, watchtower invisible, was just a yard again, damp and decaying. But the emptiness it held was profound. The doll lay still, inert. I could still feel them, a faint echo at the edges of my hearing, a residue. I turned away from the bench, away from the doll. My gaze swept across the desolate yard, searching for, what, proof, reassurance? The fog had thinned, revealing the skeletal frames of abandoned structures beyond the fence. The air still tasted metallic, like old blood. The silence was the worst. An absence that felt as potent, as suffocating, as the presence it replaced. I had faced it. I had survived. The scars were not visible, but they were there, etched deep within me. Had I truly escaped, or had I merely changed it?